Hi, everybody. We are so excited to be back at Southern Fried Gaming Expo once again. And even though it's virtual this year, we still had lots of fun things to share. You may recognize me as the co-founder and CEO of Futurists. We've been panelists and sponsors for the past, I believe, 5 years at Southern Fried. And we are very excited to be back with a new chapter of our journey. We, like many other small businesses, have had to be very adaptable this year. And we have decided that after the first 5 years of our company, we wanted to try something new, reach a consumer market, and leverage a lot of the technology that we have already been working on for quite some time. So I am so pleased and excited to be here today announcing Amoebus Labs, Atlanta's newest game development studio. With me today, I have many members of my team, but first I'm going to highlight some of our producers who are going to share a bit more about the company. First, I'd like to introduce Amy Stout.
Hi there. Thank you, Annie. Like she said, my name is Amy. I'm one of the producers at Amoebus Labs, and one of our goals is to create an inclusive environment for all of our gamers so that they feel comfortable when they put on the headset and start playing our games. We're designing for people with different abilities in mind from the get-go so that we can make virtual reality accessible to everyone, because we believe that it's just such a powerful platform and anyone can enjoy it. We're really excited because we're creating an aesthetic game that really takes advantage of all the benefits of virtual reality, and really highlights some of the unique benefits of immersive technology. So with that said, I'm going to pass it off to one of our other producers, Peter.
Yeah, we are very excited about what we have planned. Annie and I started our parent company 5 years ago for VR and AR, and we've been working ever since with business to business and training of different things. But this is the first time we're finally ready to come to the masses and make something that everybody's going to be able to enjoy. We are still going to have to keep it kind of vague what we're working on. So in a minute, we're going to talk about what we've learned and what we want to see in games. And hopefully soon we'll tell you a little bit more information.
Thanks so much, Peter. So now we are so excited to introduce Jane Wynn. I'm going to bring her on in just a minute, but Jane is actually going to be serving as our community manager for Amoebus Labs. The coolest thing about Jane, besides her amazing work and personality, is that she is actually an avid VR gamer, which puts her in prime position to be our community manager. And she is so into it that she has actually broken into the top 200 of a Beat Saber expert level song, which is something I strive to do. I don't know about you, Peter and Amy, but I couldn't do that. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Jane. So let's welcome Jane.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited to serve as Amoebus Labs community manager. And as your community manager, I'll be your first point of contact for engaging with our game studio and with our future game titles that we'll be releasing. So now I'd like to introduce to you the rest of our team here at Amoebus Labs. We have a super talented group of developers and artists to continue our discussion on R&D and our creative efforts in the form of a panel. So here we go. On the developer side, we have Pierce McBride and Shane Grant.
Hello.
Hello. Our two artists, we have Shelby Vecchio and Shelby Marie Vaughn. Welcome, everybody. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Hey. So, I wanted to engage with a little bit more with our team, with our audience here at Southern Fried on, first of all, the really cool announcement that we have releasing ourselves as a game studio. And so I wanted to get everybody started and for everybody to know us a little bit more. So I have some questions for you guys as developers and artists. So I'll start with you, Pierce. What is a favorite game that you're playing right now?
Oh, I feel like right now, like Half-Life Alex has been the thing that's like ate at a lot of my attention, especially like specifically in VR. It's the one that it's the one that I feel like best exemplifies like what you could do in VR, and is probably one of the most polished experiences in it. But if I like flip my hat and go to like developer mode, the ones that I actually find like most interesting, at least the ones that like or think about the most when I'm like actually doing development are like games that exist on both platforms, because I find it really interesting to see what works and what doesn't in different mediums. As you mentioned, like we're all kind of experimenting, doing research and development type problems, or doing research and development type like thinking right now. And being able to see a game like, for example, No Man's Sky that exists on both platforms, you can get a sense of like what works and what doesn't on these two different mediums, essentially.
Cool. Yeah. So you talked about research and development. Do you want to get into that? Because I know you are kind of our UX expert here. What are some challenges around UX that you have found specific to VR? How about we get into that?
I mean, like, it's interesting. Like both of those titles I just mentioned are like interesting case studies, because like UX in games, I always feel like is a little tricky, mostly because like there are patterns in the way that like people design games. Like you can see it in genres, like platformers, the A button usually jumps. In fact, a lot of games, the A button usually jumps. But because like VR is like kind of less defined, I feel like people are still kind of experimenting with what you can do and what you can't do, and what people expect, and what people even expect each button to do necessarily in each game. Like genres, even in VR, are kind of mushy right now. Like there's a lot of things that are definitely shooters, but like there's a lot of things that are just not quite like any other game out there right now. Like even thinking about how Alex handles their backpack is a good example. Like it's one of the cleverest things in that game, because it's contextual to the like environment that you're in and what you're holding. So like depending on when you're holding your grab behind your back, you'll either grab a clip for a pistol if you're holding a pistol, or a shotgun shell if you're holding a shotgun, or resin if you're in front of like one of the upgrade stations. And like they know which one is going to be most useful in any given circumstance. But that doesn't necessarily work for every game, and that doesn't necessarily work for every like circumstance. It's definitely the most usable game and maybe the most efficient game out there, but you wouldn't want to do that in like Arizona Sunshine or something like that, where part of like the experience is that you're fumbling around with all the stuff that you've collected as like the horde follows you around. Almost making it too efficient would be like it would get rid of like the panic of the horror of that experience. Like in general, modeling other games like the game you want to make, or modeling, I guess starting off with Alex, because it's probably probably one of the most polished experiences, would be a start. But every given experience is going to be a little bit different, and that's true in regular games too. But VR it's its own thing.
Yeah. Well, Shane, I'll move on to you. So what are some games that you're playing right now?
One game I'm playing right now is Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition on Nintendo Switch. One thing I love about that game is just it has a very grand story and a very grand sense of scale. And I remember seeing videos of it when it was on the original Wii, and it was it blew my mind then, and even still it blows my mind now, just to see the level of scope and size, all the optimization, all the techniques needed to kind of visualize this game, because it's one of those games where everything is visible and everything can be explored. So you can see a nearby mountain. As soon as you start the game, you can see a nearby mountain all the way over off to the distance, and you can easily go there. Just wander over there, gradually make your way up to the mountain, and look down on everything else. And as a developer, I look at that and I think to myself, that's extremely fascinating, because if I were to if I kill an enemy and then it drops a item on the ground, that item would stay in memory right there until I pick it up. And I find it fascinating just to think, how do they maintain that? Do they maintain the state of that item and just say, okay, there's an item box here. What's in it? We don't really care, but as long as it's maintained in terms of memory, is it a scenario where it kind of just puts it down as a decimal point in terms of the map and go from there? There's so many clever tricks of the trade that you look at that game and examine it through, and it's utterly fascinating as a developer. As a player, I enjoy watching it and playing the game too, just because it has a great combat system. The gameplay is very smooth. The 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 story is great. The music is amazing. It's one of those games that I would honestly consider darn near perfect when you really boil it down to its essentials.
So we know that you like to play Twitch. The Switch a lot. Is there a VR game that you have played that is a favorite of yours, or that you just like to play a lot of?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So there's two games I want to bring up here, and I haven't gotten a chance to play Alex yet. I do look forward to that. I want to play on the Index. I look really forward to that device, and I really want to try it out in that system. But one game I've been playing with me and my family is Superhot. Over the week, a couple of weeks ago, it was Father's Day weekend, and I took my Oculus with me to go visit my family. And so my grandmother, my sisters, so I have two small sisters, one around 7, one around 9, and an older one who's in her 20s, as well as my little brother and our dad, all got a chance to go through and play Superhot. And we have some footage of both of my brother and my sister and my dad all going through and playing the game. And you see them going through and doing the motions and the movements, and just seeing how wild and crazy they get with it. That game is extremely fun. Although I will say this, as important to any person who's working with VR, they need to be careful because people have a tendency of getting too close. And I tell you, when people are in VR, they can't see what they're doing. So I end up getting socked right in the face by my sister because she couldn't see me. So she punches one of the enemies in that game, ends up socking me right in my face. I had to walk off like it didn't hurt, got to look cool, from the little sisters. But I mean, it kind of hurt there. Another game I'm playing is Vader Immortal, which, as a huge Star Wars fan, it's great. I would say that if any of you guys get a chance to go to the Void, whether it be in Atlanta or even in I think Florida, you may go a chance to play the Star Wars experience in there. It connects to Vader Immortal, and it's really fascinating just to see how that kind of connection goes technically across platform, if that makes sense.
Yes, I love the Void. I think anytime there's a new experience there, I'm going out there. I'm first in line. So
yeah.
Yeah.
It was so great. I think all of us actually, during some of our experiences here, we all went to the Void and we did the Jumanji experience.
Right. Yeah, that was amazing. That was fun.
It was so good.
Shelby, what are some games that you're playing right now?
Well, I am on the Animal Crossing train, pretty hardcore. So I know it's not VR, but it's a game that I've been playing since I was a kid. Due to nostalgia, the ease of the gameplay, and just how cool it's the evolution of graphics over time has completely got my attention. So that's something I am avidly playing in my spare time.
Shelby Marie, how about you? What are some games you're playing right now?
Shay named a lot of the games that I was playing. So Vader Immortal, that's one of my favorites right now. After working on a VR game, I've just noticed all of the work that goes into it. So I can really appreciate all the different colors and textures in that game. And they have like a really cool cutscene. So that's one of my favorites.
Cool. So we're going to get into some technical topics now, especially with Pierce and Shane, especially since we're kind of in the middle of of developing right now. So Pierce, I'll kick it off to you first. What are some mechanics that you thought were hard to implement that are actually easier than you thought, or vice versa?
It's funny. I feel like in my experience, it's not what usually ends up happening is not that like I think something is hard and it's actually going to be easy, or something that I think is easy going to be hard. It's like, to somebody who like doesn't program, all the things that you would think are hard are easy, and all the things that you think are easy are hard. Like a good example of this, we use Unity as our primary game engine for this, which is essentially like a pre-constructed framework for developing games. The other big one is Unreal, but they essentially share the same systems, and they have the same properties in this case. You could have like a 3D model rendered, looking beautiful, animating in VR on a headset in like less than 5 minutes on both. But if you wanted to do something like pick up an object, or heaven forbid, grab an object with two hands at the same time in VR, that's actually much harder than you would expect. There's this concept of the door problem, which is maybe a good way of like thinking about it in game design, or at least it's a way of explaining it. If you want to include a door in a game, or grab mechanics, grabbing a box or something like that, you don't get a lot for free necessarily. Like, you have to make a lot of decisions about how it's going to act and how it's going to behave in a lot of different circumstances. So like with doors, you have to say, can the player open every door? What do doors look like? What do doors sound like? If players can open doors, what's the difference between a door that they can and can't open? Can doors lock? Oh, then how do you explain that difference? A door that you can open, that it's locked, versus a door you can't open, versus a door that is open and unlocked. The same kind of applies to like hand mechanics. When you're trying to grab something, you need to be aware of the fact that like the fidelity of action, or like the motion that you can capture on these controllers, is way higher fidelity than a traditional like controller, a traditional Xbox controller or something like that, when you're just pressing A to grab something. In those cases, it's kind of faked. It's like just an animation happening, and then you get something in your inventory. Here, you're like physically doing it. So you have to know what happens if the player sticks their hand into the object. What happens if they drop it? What happens if they drop it in the corner? What happens if they drop it on their head? What happens if they drop it behind them? What happens if they pick it up with two hands? Where should it go? Your hands aren't actually physically stopped from doing a lot of things because you're not like in the real world. Like if you imagine punching a wall, in real life, your hand's going to stop. In VR, your hand isn't going to stop, but the VR virtual hand should do something. What that something is actually more complicated, both design and technically, than one would expect.
Yeah, so it makes it really, thinking about all those kinds of mechanics and even the physics of it just makes not your job harder, but you have to think a lot more as a developer on how people will react to a game that has nothing to do with even the gameplay itself. It just has to do with making it feel as real as it can.
Yeah, and part of the reason, like Alex is actually, not to continually bring up the same game over and over again, but like that's the one that you can point to and go like, they made something feel natural. Like if you stick your hand, like if you grab something in Alex, you can grab it from any given point. You can grab it with two hands and then lift it up and move it around, and it feels natural, even though you know your hands are not necessarily exactly where they are in game. And like, that's impressive. I still don't know how they did it.
Yeah, me too. I guess the only thing that's missing is the weight itself, right? To make it feel even the most real as possible.
Yeah, haptics is actually a big part of this.
Yeah. We'll get there too. So Shane, you have a little background in game development. How did you get started in VR? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. When I started off in VR, I was going to school at Southern Polytechnic State University, now Kennesaw State's Marietta campus. And I was in my sophomore year. I was in the game lab. And one of my friends asked me if I would like to get involved with a research project. They're talking about this new fangled technology from this company called Oculus. I'm like, okay, sounds interesting. What's it about? And he came in with this black box. There's almost this case brought it on the table and says, "Dude, this thing's gonna be the future right here." I'm like, "Oh, it really is okay." And then I suppose we'll see it. Opens it up, and he shows me the Oculus Rift Dev Kit 1, 2014. It was kind of a black box here, and gives it to me. We hook it up. Took us forever to set it up, but once we hooked it up and we went through some of the sample projects that people had provided, I was floored, honestly. I've been in VR before, but it was kind of that VR that you see in amusement parks where it's a little bit where they put you in a bit of a headset, but you're kind of pretty stationary about it. If you can't really rotate, you can't really move or anything like that. But when I was in there, I was absolutely floored by just how it felt. It was the first time. It was so small. I didn't have to be in this big old chest high bit where I couldn't really move very much or anything like that. It was able to. It had a decent amount of degrees of freedom. I was able to move. I was able to interact and pick up objects. It really just introduced me to a whole new world, and I just could not fathom it. And ever since then, I've been working closely with VR. I worked in research projects, kind of examining the do's and don'ts in VR development, such as what can you do, what were some things that you can do with players, with some things you can't. So, for example, one thing we did was we actually put a player on a conveyor belt and kind of had him going through a bit of a shooting gallery. But we realized quickly that's not how you do that kind of thing. It makes people sick. And from there, I gone into work with other companies that did VR for medical purposes and other commercial purposes before moving on to Futurist and now Amoebas.
So in the past, you've worked a little bit with AR as well. So how does that differ from VR in terms of the applications for development?
Well, it differs in terms of, I guess, purpose here. In the case of VR, you're taking someone and you're bringing them into a virtual world where they're interacting with objects, 3D elements in environment, and you have to carefully choreograph and control every aspect of that. As Pierce was saying earlier, some of the harder things about VR is just making sure that just how does people grab things? How do they move with things? How do they interact with things in VR? Versus in augmented reality, AR development, I wouldn't say easier, but it's different. So in augmented reality, you're taking something and you're putting it into the real world, and viewers and users are viewing it through a lens. So let's say I'm trying to pick up a sword. In the VR example, I'm trying to go through, grab the sword, interact with it, move my character around. I want to make sure when I grab it, it snaps properly. That's something you have to consider. You have to consider how you move it. How does it interact with people? We got to make sure that kind of elements. In the case of AR, however, when you generate that sword, you have to figure out a way to make it feel like as though it's a part of the real world environment. You have to make it feel like as though when a player interacts with that sword, it has weight. It has depth to it. It doesn't look like as though it's just an overlay on top of the screen. It's something that you can actually see, move, and interact with. And that's, I feel, the biggest difference between AR and VR. VR is putting someone into a virtual world and making that feel real to them. AR is taking something out of the virtual world and putting it into the real world and making that have weight and depth to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're all experts here, but we also know the gaming community too has kind of like a still an introductory like phase into the gaming on AR platforms and VR platforms. And so we're really excited to introduce ourselves as, first of all, a gaming studio, but also specifically in VR gaming too. So thank you, Shane, for being where you are, but also introducing that differentiation between the two. So Shelby, I'll move on to you. You have an art background, and not so much even in VR, but here you are working with us in VR. So how would you say you got your start with your art background to where you are now working with us at a VR gaming studio?
Yeah, so my background originally, I began, of course, as a fine artist. Usually how most artists start is with a pencil and paper. So that's where I got my beginnings, I guess you could say, to breathe the creativity to keep trying new things. I luckily grew up in a very open-minded environment, so I was constantly given opportunities to experiment with new mediums physically. And as I got older, I was introduced to the digital platforms of art, and that also piqued my interest. So I studied at UNCA and I got a degree in new media. So I also was very fortunate to experiment with all kinds of mediums. So I've worked in print, web, performance media, 3D animation, 3D modeling, 2D animation. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything. And it's kind of like kept my attention. I've worked out of college in healthcare studios and government contractor agencies as well. So I have kind of worked all over the place. But I was introduced to Futurists a little while ago and introduced into the VR world. And because of my ever evolving creative, I guess you could say, need for different kinds of ways to express creativity, VR was just that much more exciting to get my hands on. So from there, I started learning to develop for VR, AR, and it has completely gotten my attention. And now I don't know if I could ever go back. So now moving into developing for a game studio platform, that even itself has made me think in different ways, where now I am designing more like an industrial designer, and figuring out how one interacts with the actual thing that we make. So that's extremely exciting. So yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah, that flexibility in your early life as a student, but also as a professional, soon after that, kind of just has afforded you this flexibility in moving into AR and VR as well. So that's really exciting. So how would you describe your like design workflow? How did it evolve from where you were before VR and then developing it, your art style and your art workflow into a VR platform now?
So now knowing the output for where the graphics are going, that changes everything. So constantly keeping that in mind, where these graphics are going to live, which is in virtual reality. So of course, that's just depending on the context of whatever is going on in VR. So sometimes it has to be real world scale, sometimes it has to be bigger, sometimes it can be completely made up, or maybe it needs to conform to physical or natural standards of like how things exist in the world. So I still use some of my same practices of brainstorming and research when it comes to design, but now I have to look at it as like a physical object, maybe, or maybe it's a hypothetical magical thing. I don't know. So it's a lot more fluid, and it's a lot more to play with, which is really freaking awesome. Yeah.
Cool. So Shelby Marie, you are an intern on our team and you're still in school. So is there anything that you're learning in school right now that has helped you apply it to VR development and VR creativity in what you're doing for Amoebus Labs?
Yeah, I would say so. So I am a student at Georgia State still. One class that comes to mind that really prepared me for this experience was Jason Drakeford's cross-media design class. In there, we worked on a variety of platforms, so from print design to mobile and web, and a little bit of immersive media. So like they talked about earlier, augmented reality and virtual reality, and just different ways of using design. So I definitely got some good technical skills from that experience, reinforced those principles of design But I think the most valuable thing that I got from that class was learning to be fluid with my design, like as Shelby just said, making the most of the medium you're using. So VR is very immersive, and there's so much you can do, like when you're inside of this piece of art. So that is one class that really prepared me for this.
So you're an artist that has also worked in many different mediums as well. But what is your process like specifically in creating 2D assets?
Sure. So my process, we'll say like doing the textures for Amoebus Labs, I have to balance, realism and our stylistic choices. So as Shelby mentioned earlier, sometimes you do want to conform to like some real physical objects, but also like have fun with them as well. So my process has been researching like objects, playing around with those textures, bouncing it around with the team, getting inspired, and revising those ideas.
Thanks, Shelby Marie. Great answers from everybody. Thank you for your engagement. I wanted to introduce our team at Amoebus Labs of our developers and our artists. So I want to thank them for sharing a little bit about themselves, their background, their creative process, and just a little bit of them so that you can kind of see where we're at here at Amoebus Labs. So thank you again. I'm really excited for, after everything we've talked about, for what we are in the endeavor that we have going forth with the Amoebus Labs. So I hope everybody in our audience right now is also excited along with me. And so to move on, I'm going to introduce Jamie Lance. She's our marketing manager here at Amoebus Labs, and she's going to share a little bit on where you could keep up to date with everything that we have going on out in the world. So take it away, Jamie Lance.
Thank you, Jane. Yes, my name is Jamie Lance, and I am the marketing coordinator at Amoebus Labs. And just make sure to follow us on social media at Amoebus Labs and to register at amoebuslabs.com so that you can get all of our updates and sneak peeks of what we're working on, and also a chance to win one of 3 Amoebus Labs swag bags for during the Southern Fried Gaming virtual event. You have either followed or registered by Sunday, July 12th at midnight. We look forward to engaging with you guys, and we're so excited about this new announcement, and we look forward to the future. Thank you.